It's an Archaeodeath publication launch.
Hello everybody, it's Howard Williams here, Professor of Archaeology at the University of Chester, with a little video to introduce my brand new publication. It's not my work, it's an edited collection of the work of the late Professor Dai Morgan Evans, and it's called Archaeologies and Antiquaries, and it's published by Archaeopress, and it's 14 essays by Dai that's been edited and brought to publication by myself, Dr. Cara Critchell, and Dai's widow Sheena Evans. We're going to do a book launch and reflection on the contribution of Dai Morgan Evans to archaeology in November of this year as part of the Department of History and Archaeology's seminar series, research seminars, and I will be announcing more about that in due course. For the moment, however, I wanted to simply let you know the book is out. I'll be doing an Archaeodeath blog post and TikTok about it, and it is a wonderful collection of 298 pages, 14 chapters. Now, the opening chapter I want to talk about, and then I will give a quick review of the other chapters in this video. The opening chapter is called Dai Morgan Evans, A Life in Archaeology, and it's authored by myself, Chris Musson, Christopher Young, Rosemary Cramp, Adrian James and Sheena Evans, and it explores the life of Dai and his contribution to archaeology from his early years through his time in Cardiff, in the inspectorate, through his move to English Heritage, or what was to become English Heritage, the English inspectorate that became English Heritage, his time as General Secretary of the Society of Antiquaries of London, and in retirement his various teaching and media work, including being influential in supporting and extending the archaeology contributions at the University of Chester, and he was became in 2006 a visiting professor at the University of Chester, and his contribution as a General Secretary of the Society of Antiquaries to a TV programme exploring the building of a Roman villa at Butser Ancient Farm, and then in retirement his contribution of designing and overseeing the design and building of a Roman villa for Channel 4's Rome Wasn't Built in a Day programme, which has had a lasting legacy. And indeed both the Butser Ancient Farm and the Rochester Roman City buildings are long-term heritage assets used for education and entertainment and visitors to those locations. So the story of Dai as an academic, as an archaeologist, as a governmental archaeologist is explored in this introduction, including a poem by Adrian James, exploring Dai's time as a FSA and General Secretary of the Society of Antiquaries. So that's the introduction, which also includes, of course, Dai's influential and inspiring work in setting up and the early stages of Project Elizeg, which I have co-directed with him, Dr. Gary Robinson and Professor Nancy Edwards. Now, the introduction then sets up the remaining chapters, and we've structured the book into 4 sections, really. The first section explores Dai's contributions to early medieval archaeology, with chapters called The Origins of Powys, Christian, Heretic or Pagan, Irish Influence in Post-Roman Mid-Wales, an Early Christian Monument from Llanwyddelan, Montgomeryshire, and the Legacy and a book chapter called Legacy Hunting and Welsh Identities. Now, each of those publications have been published before in county journals and edited books, but here they're brought together for the first time, re-edited, reformatted, with fresh images in some cases, and footnotes and citations in places updated to include citations to some of the more recent studies on their topics. And that's really first part, introducing Dai's work on early medieval archaeology in Western Britain. We then have a section looking at the sort of preservation and antiquarian engagement with ancient monuments, with a chapter called King Arthur and Cadbury Castle, Somerset, looking at the various traditions associating South Cadbury with Camelot, the court of the legendary King Arthur. Then we have an 18th century description of the Cerne Abbas giant, obviously recently redated by the National Trust as a later Anglo-Saxon period chalk hill figure. This is a republication of Dai's reflections on the earliest sources, the antiquarian sources from the 18th century. A chapter called Et in Arcadia, the Problem with Ruins, and in that Dai reflects on the various different challenges and changing traditions of conserving ruined sites in England and Wales. Then we have the third section of the book, which explores antiquarians and basically from the 18th century through the 19th century, with chapters the Antiquaries, the Society of Antiquaries, 1707 to 1718, meeting places and origin stories, looking at the very beginnings, or the sort of legendary beginnings of the Society of Antiquaries of London. A chapter called Banks is the Villain, Sir Joseph Banks and the Governance of the Society of Antiquaries. And then a chapter called Octavius Morgan, Journal of a Tour Through North Wales in 1821. So we've gone from early medieval through sort of antiquarian and ruin studies to the study of the origins of the Society of Antiquaries and antiquarian tours in Wales. And we finally end in Wales with the history of the Church of Llangar near Corwen, and a four-part study which has been republished, exploring the church and community in the early 18th centuries, with the early 18th century, with four parts: the fabric of the church, the poor vermin and other matters, Christmas, Holy Communion, ale and the wardens, and finally hierarchy, liturgy, fixtures and fittings. And it's only appropriate, given this focuses on about archaeology and antiquarians, that the final section of that final paper ends with a reflection on the church records of Llangar Church, where one individual is described, the person who is described in the records as an antiquarian. And this is a person called Ellis Edward, weaver of Cynwydd, who was married to Elizabeth Davies at Llangar on the 12th of May 1736. Their first child was John, and their second child was Edward, and their third child Catherine. And by the time of the baptism of the fourth child, Mary, they were living in Cynwydd. Mary died of smallpox in 1750, and her father, Ellis Edward of Cynwydd, who until that point was simply recorded as a weaver, is described as weaver and antiquarian. And Dai reflects on how there's no further evidence or trace of the family despite his exhaustive searches, and it just makes the point that a weaver could acquire in local prestige and fame and activities the title of antiquarian in the mid 18th century. So he says, so far I have not found any trace of the opinion or work of Ellis Edward, but it is of interest that Edward Samuel, as the intellectual leader of the area, recognised a field of study and accorded Ellis Edward the status of antiquarian within his location community, even though he was an apparent landless weaver. It is apparent that from this that students of the past were not drawn solely from the clergy and the gentry classes. And with that understatement, you get a sense of the breadth and character of Dai's contribution to archaeology, the study of Wales and Western England in the early Middle Ages, and the study of ruins and conservation and management practices, and his contribution to understanding the history of antiquarianism and early archaeology, and the study of the Welsh Church. So we think it's a lovely collection that does honour to Dai, and hopefully will be of wider use for scholars on a range of themes studying Wales and Western Britain more broadly, and scholars of the early Middle Ages, and scholars interested in the history of archaeology and our various changing strategies and attitudes to the conservation and treatment and perception of ancient monuments. So I hope that's of interest to you, and I've got other publications coming out soon, and I will give further videos on them. And remember, I'll look out for our advertisements about the book launch for this book, which will be taking place in November 2022 as an online event via the University of Chester's History and Archaeology Research Seminars.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the Archaeodeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.